What's going on, everybody? Welcome back to another episode of the Total Takedown. This week is UFC Vegas 78. It is not, it's UFC Vegas 80. I'm losing track of these numbers. UFC Vegas 80, we're looking at overs and unders. Instead of just picking a side, maybe you can find a little additional value by going under or going over a total. This is Pub Sports Radio. Make sure you hit that like button for me and let's dig straight on into it. First fight of the night, you've got Montana De La Rosa taking on JJAldrich, and we've got a 2.5 chalked all the way up to minus 375. And it's kind of hard to argue in this point. I know JJAldrich got a finish in her last fight, but that was against notorious gas master Na Liang, somebody who is essentially helpless as soon as they get tired past that 5 minute or so mark. So no surprise that she got the finish there. I think that's her one and only finish at the UFC level. Montana De La Rosa, on the other hand, different story. This girl is more than capable of finishing. She is nasty with her ground and pound. She's got a decent submission offense. However, JJAldrich does tend to be durable. This is a very long-winded way of saying I do think if there's a finish, it comes from Montana De La Rosa, but it's not enough for me to go under 2.5. I just don't see where or how JJ would finish this outside of some kind of a fluky DQ, an eye poke, some crazy situation like that. So I would say take Montana De La Rosa inside the distance if you think a finish is taking place. Otherwise, this is probably going over, and I'm not laying minus 375. Next up, Nate Maness takes on Mateo Mendons. We've got a 2.5. Under is minus 135. I talked about this one on Monday. I kind of had my eyeballs peeled on it at about minus 120, minus 125. It does look like some money's come in that direction, and I think that's the right way to go. Both these guys cutting down to 125. We're not sure how that's going to affect them, whether one will have an advantage, whether one will be compromised. There's a lot of ways that this weight cut could add to this fight going under, and they both are finishers. They both have the kind of offense that you're looking for to have a fight go under as well. So I like this under 2.5. That one might actually make my card. Vanessa Demopoulos takes on Kanako Murata up next. Over 2.5 is minus 270. Very much like the first fight of the night. You've got these tough, durable women. Both of them wrestle boxers. They both hit relatively hard, but they're both tough and durable. I think this is mostly going to be a grappling match, and because of that, I do think this one's probably going over. I don't want to get too fancy with it. Something crazy could happen, but I kind of doubt it. Over 2.5 is going to be the look here on that one. But again, I don't really like minus 270. Next up, you've got Haruichi Long. I always mess up his name. I read it and it is not read the way it's pronounced. Haruichi Long takes on Johnny Munoz. 2.5 the total. Over 2.5 is minus 110. Under 2.5 is slightly juiced at minus 120. And it's another one where I do kind of lean with the over. Haruichi Long is a guy that is tough to finish. We talked about this in his last fight against Damon Zahabi. And my co-host on Monday actually pointed out something I think we all missed. Zahabi might have underrated power. Like, we might just not give that guy the credit he deserves for how hard he hits. So he did go ahead and take out Haruichi Long, but that's the first and only time he's ever been knocked out. Now, he has been submitted before, and that's my main concern here. Johnny Munoz Jr. has a nasty submission game, but he has been neutralized before. He's a guy that's been paced before. He's a guy that's been wrestled before, put on his back, fishes for those subs, and just doesn't quite get them. And I think at Fight Ready, they will have Haruichi Long in the right mindset for that kind of offense, and this guy does not finish at the UFC level. I don't think he's capable of finishing Johnny Munoz Jr. at the UFC level. So for me personally, I would be leaning to the over 2.5 here. Now, the last time I did this with an Haruichi Long type of fight, it bit me hard. You can't underestimate the finishing ability of Johnny Munoz Jr. So I'm going to pick the over for the sake of the show. I will not be betting this total. Next up, you've got Karolina Kowalkiewicz taking on Diana Belbita. 2.5 the total. Over 2.5 is minus 425. Under 2.5 is plus 300. Now, this is where we get into that realm of maybe you just sprinkle a little bit on the under 2.5, because how the heck is this number so big? I mean, Karolina, I know she's done a lot recently, but she's been facing a very low level of competition, and in fact, she has finished a couple of those level of competition with her grappling. She's got submission upside, and even though I think Diana Belbita is going to be able to hang with her on the mat, you never know if KK gets her back, that could be a wrap. And on top of that, KK still just does not like getting punched in the face, and that's what Diana Belbita is going to do. On top of that, we have seen KK subbed before. More of her finish Joadrich's losses have come by submission than they have come by knockout. And Diana Belbita, before she got to the UFC, she was snapping arms off left and right on the regional scene. I do think there's some submission upside on this fight. I do think both women have finishing opportunity. I actually think the under 2.5 taking a flyer on that plus 300 may not be such a bad sprinkle. Felipe Lins takes on Ion Cutelaba up next. We've got a 1.5 total for these big boys. Over 1.5 is plus 125. Under 1.5 is minus 160. And I am kind of tempted to buck the trend here and go over 1.5. We've seen Ion Cutelaba be capable of going to the wrestling well. That's something he's got in his back pocket. Usually his fight IQ lets him down far before he ever gets to that point, and that's part of the problem. Trusting Ion Cutelaba in any way, shape, or fashion is the issue. Felipe Lins, this guy is deadly in round one. Fast hands, hits hard, very accurate, but after that, he gets tired really quick. Now, he is capable of coasting. He can push people up against the fence. He can kind of cage grapple. We've seen him capable of that before, and if Ion does get the grappling going, I don't think Felipe Lins is much of a submission threat off of his back, and while Ion does do the gorilla hammer fisty type of ground and pound, I don't know if he's going to be able to outmuscle someone like Lins and get to that dominant position where he can make use of that ground and pound. I think it'll be mostly a control game. I kind of think if this thing gets past the first 3 minutes of the fight, it probably goes the whole distance. Like, we might see a couple of big, tired, heaving heavyweights in here who are fighting at 205. So I know, light heavyweight, but you get the point. I kind of think over 1.5 at plus money might not be a half bad look. Alexander Hernandez takes on Bill Algeo up next, a 2.5 total here. Alexander trying to drop back down. We saw what happened last time. The cardio failed, the pressure got to him, and he crumpled. He's getting an almost identical matchup here in Bill Algeo, just a guy that doesn't quite have the athleticism of Billy Q. Very similar style, weaponized cardio, high-level grappling, but doesn't quite have the pressure striking, doesn't quite have the pop on his punches. And that begs the question, will he be enough to break Alexander Hernandez? It's kind of a baby's first swim lesson type of situation. They're letting him ease his way back in with a very similar matchup that's just not quite as dangerous. And I think that might lead to an over here. Bill Algeo's legendary durability, I think, is going to be on full display. He's extremely hittable, blocks every single punch thrown at him with his forehead. So because of that, Hernandez could nuke this guy early. However, if Hernandez has learned his lesson from his last couple of fights, that's that he needs to slow down, pace himself, don't quite put as much on every single punch as he usually does, and that'll lead to a slower paced fight that he can actually win with his grappling. So I kind of do think we get a full 15-minute over 2.5. It gets hairy at a couple of points, but Hernandez is able to hit takedowns when he needs to, and this thing makes it the distance. I'll say over 2.5. Next up, you've got Drew Dober and Ricky Glenn. I don't know what to make of this fight. We've got a 2.5 that under is chalked all the way to minus 240. Normally speaking, when they have a 2.5 like that, they would just lower the number to a 1.5. They would get you a more competitive line at the 1.5. I'm not sure why we have a 2.5 with this kind of juice on it, quite frankly. So I'm tempted on that under like everybody else is. However, Rick Glenn, outside of his last fight, has been incredibly durable over the course of his entire MMA career. And Drew Dober is just coming off getting knocked out himself. We could see a fight where these guys are a little bit more tentative than they normally are. And if that happens, this thing probably turns into a technical kickboxing match, or we may even see some grappling because neither of them want to get the lights shut off again. And this thing might sail over, believe it or not. I do think Drew Dober eventually clips Rick Glenn and puts him out. But if Rick Glenn is just his same old durable self that we've seen his whole career outside of his last fight, maybe he can take those punches this time around. So that price tag on the over 2.5 is kind of tempting me. Maybe it's a trap. Maybe it's a trap. I'm probably not going to bet this total, but I would be tempted to buck the trend and go over instead of under. Next up, you've got Alex Morono taking on Joaquin Buckley. 2.5 the total. Over is plus 135. Under is minus 175. And I would be tempted to lay the chalk here in this spot. I really would. Joaquin Buckley, we have seen him do everything well. His wrestling is coming along. He's in phenomenal shape. He hits hard. He's fast. He's very technical. He's obviously turned a corner in his career. He's added some skills. Alex Morono, he comes and throws the kitchen sink at everybody he has ever fought, and it's up to them whether or not they can survive it. I don't see anything different here. I expect him to come out guns blazing, and that's the kind of fight that turns both these guys into scrappers. I just think it's going to escalate. You know what I mean? One of these guys eventually is going to get hit with a big shot and go down, so I don't think it'll slow down once they start landing, and that leads me to probably an under. We've seen them both get hit hard enough to finish. We've also seen them both go down takedown. So I definitely think we have finishing upside on both sides of this fight. Next up, you've got Joe Pyfer in the co-main event taking on Abdul Razak Al Hassan. And we've got a 1.5 total that is juiced all the way to minus 215 on that under. And I hate chalked up 1.5s like that. I really do. I always have the instinct to buck the trend and go the opposite direction whenever we get these crazy numbers. But when you get guys that match up like this, it is really hard to trust that you're not just burning money, because this fight really should end in round 1. Abdul Razak Al Hassan is almost exclusively winning in round 1, and if he doesn't win in round 1, he doesn't win at all. And then you've got Joe Pyfer, who looks like he's the complete package. He's got everything you're looking for. He can strike, he can grapple, he can move, and he can control that range and that distance, and we've seen that bite Abdul Razak Al Hassan. He's also a guy that's fighting up a weight class. Abdul usually is a weight class lower than this, so I think it's a good setup spot for Joe Pyfer to really show out, and he should be able to take that early punishment, being the bigger, more physical guy in there, and then return fire himself. He's a finisher. There's definitely upside both of these guys, but we haven't seen Joe Pyfer finished. Until we see that happen, I'm not going to count on it happening. I do think it's Joe Pyfer on Saturday, but I do also think it's probably early. So I'll say under 1.5, not playing it. Grant Dawson takes on Bobby Green in your main event. 4.5 the total. Over 4.5 is plus 160. Under 4.5 is minus 210. And this one kind of shapes up for me where Grant Dawson is your Walmart discount Islam Makhachev, right? Like, he's going to look for the body lock. He's going to take the back. Bobby Green is a really tough guy to submit, but he does give up his back, and that's the problem. Is I think he's going to get backpacked, and I think he's going to get backpacked a lot, because every time he tries to get away from his opponents, he turns that back and he gives it up, and that's exactly playing into Grant Dawson's game plan. The UFC knows who they're pushing in this spot. They gave them a perfect name with a perfect style so that he can show out and do what he does best. And then once we get to the ground, I'm not sure Grant Dawson is going to be able to find that sub, because let's face it, really nobody finds that sub on Bobby Green these days. So because of that, I think he's going to have to resort to elbows. I actually think we end up seeing a similar TKO finish, but it's going to take time to get there. I think it'll probably come late, where it's almost a mercy stoppage, where the ref has just kind of seen enough. So I do think we get into maybe like the 4th or the 5th round here in this fight, where Bobby Green is just tough enough to hang in there and make something of himself, show out well early, and then just kind of concedes to the pressure deep in the night. So I do think we'll go under 4.5, but minus 210 is insane, because Bobby Green is a really tough guy to put away, and even though he should lose this fight, it just seems really wide to me here. So I'm going to say under 4.5, but no way in heck am I touching that money line or that under at minus 210. That's the total takedown, everybody. Thank you so much for watching. Do not forget, tomorrow is the Undefeated Post Weigh-In Show, and then we ride to glory on Saturday. Good luck on all your degenerate action, folks. I screwed that up. Good luck on all your degenerate action. Let's roll.